So chapter 3 is called Anatomy and Research Methods. So we're going to talk a lot about the body and the different parts of the body and what research has told us about how those parts function. First off, let's start with the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system, if you look at the picture, is composed of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system connects to the brain and spinal cord. It connects the rest of the body to the brain and spinal cord. You've got the somatic nervous system, which is in control of the muscles, and it also helps convey information from your senses, as well as the autonomic nervous system, which controls heart rate, intestines, and your other organs. So if you look in the blue, the parts that are in blue are your somatic nervous system here, and then the parts that are in red, not as prominent, the red parts, those parts are the autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for your muscles and things of that nature. I want everybody to make sure, I don't know if you need to make note cards or how you best memorize definitions, but these are some terms that you'll need to know about anatomy. And if you've taken anatomy or physiology or something like that, or a biology class that you remember these from, that will be important because this tells you the different directions it's referring to when it talks about the various areas of the body. So make sure that you just are aware of this chart, which is in your textbook. Here are some more terms that you also should know, and you just need to memorize these terms as well, referring to different parts of the nervous system that we are not going to go into a lot of detail about in lecture. The spinal cord is the part of the central nervous system that's located in the spinal column. It is through your spinal cord that communication about your muscles and your senses reach the brain. Also, communication about pain and things like that are all housed in your spinal cord. There are two types of matter that exist in the spinal cord. There's gray matter and white matter. So gray matter here, like the brown part, white matter here, like the yellow part. Your gray matter is located in the center of the spinal cord. It's densely packed together with different cell bodies and dendrites. Your white matter is composed mostly of myelinated axons that is carrying the information from the gray matter to other areas of your spinal cord. Each of those segments helps send the sensory information that your brain needs to receive from your senses and your motor commands. The autonomic nervous system, which is a part of the peripheral nervous system, sends and receives messages to regulate the automatic behaviors of the body. So these are things that happen automatically that the autonomic nervous system helps regulate. So the autonomic nervous system can be divided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So once again, if you look at the chart, your sympathetic nervous system is over here, and these red lines help you see which parts control the sympathetic nervous system, and the parasympathetic nervous system is located right here. And then you can see how the parasympathetic nervous system works in conjunction. Your sympathetic nervous system helps prepare your organs for rigorous activity. It's what helps you if you are in a situation where you think it's dangerous and you have to engage in fight or flight. It can cause your heart rate to increase and your blood pressure to go up. It can cause you to have some respiration issues. Your sympathetic nervous system is there to help protect you from any danger that could come your way. The parasympathetic nervous system is what facilitates your non-emergency response. It is mainly activated when we are relaxed, like when you're getting ready to go to sleep, you're in your home, you're not feeling threatened or anything like that. The role of the parasympathetic nervous system is to decrease the functioning that is increased by the sympathetic nervous system. So just think of yourself at times when you work yourself up. That is your parasympathetic nervous system at play. And then when you're able to calm down, that's because your parasympathetic nervous system has come into play. In the autonomic nervous system, the main neurotransmitters that are playing a role are the axons, which are sending the information from your peripheral nervous system and releasing the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Remember, acetylcholine plays a role in memory. And then the sympathetic nervous system primarily uses the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. Here's another chart that shows you the major divisions of the brain: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. There's also some other names for it. I won't ask you those complicated names. Forebrain, middle brain, or hindbrain is probably what they'll be referred to, but you do need to know the structures that are associated with those parts of the brain. And you can see from the image that here are some based on a fish brain, it's showing you the different divisions, what a hindbrain might look like, what a midbrain and a forebrain. Of course, it's going to be different for a real human, but you get the idea of how things exist in the brain. The hindbrain consists of the medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum. So we've got the medulla here, and damage to the medulla can be fatal. We've got the pons here, and the cerebellum is going to be up here and separate or connect those two sides. These things are located in the posterior portion of the brain. The medulla, which is just above the spinal cord, is an enlarged extension of the spinal cord, and it controls your breathing, your heart rate, your coughing, sneezing, salivation, etc. And as I said before, if it's damaged, it can be fatal because it controls your breathing, it controls your heart rate. Here are various cranial nerves, and your cranial nerves play a role in the functioning of your medulla. Again, you should know these various cranial nerves. The olfactory system is responsible for your sense of smell, the optic nerve for your vision, and etc. So be sure that you look at this chart as well. Also located in the hindbrain are the pons, which are on both sides of the medulla. There's an axon for each half of the brain that crosses to the opposite side, and that's where the pons are located. It helps bridge those two parts of the brain. Your cerebellum is responsible for you being able to balance yourself and stand up straight and to have various motor movements and coordination. It is located in your hindbrain with many, many deep folds. And it's also going to play a role in your ability to maintain attention. But the main thing you really need to remember about the cerebellum is that it controls your balance and your coordination movement. The midbrain contains the tectum, both of the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus areas of the brain, the tegmentum as well, and the substantia nigra. Not everything is listed on this particular picture, but you can see various images in your textbook. So the tectum is the roof of the midbrain. It forms the roof of the middle part of the brain. And then Your superior colliculus and inferior colliculus help process that sensory information that's coming from the spinal cord. And the tegmentum is able to control those cranial nerves and your reticular formation, whereas the substantia nigra gives rise to the dopamine-containing pathways that help get you ready for movement and being able to function properly. Your forebrain is at the front. It contains the outer cortex, it contains the cerebral cortex, and receives this sensory information that's coming from the spinal cord. It also controls your movement for opposite sides of the body. So you can see here from the picture an example of the posterior and the anterior parts of the forebrain. Your limbic system is responsible for your emotions. There are various interlinked structures that help form the border, including all of the structures that you see there listed, but your limbic system's main role is in emotional responses. Here are a couple of other structures that are also a part of your forebrain. One being the thalamus, which is responsible for sensory organs, and every sense is processed through the thalamus except for olfaction. And then the hypothalamus, which is responsible for all pleasurable behaviors and hormones, things like eating, drinking, sexual behavior, anything that you're motivated by. These two glands work together. The pituitary gland is what helps secrete hormones. It is a part of your hypothalamus, and the basal ganglia is composed of the caudate nucleus and various other organs that help you maintain your attention. It helps you mentally focus and plan, and also plays a role in movement. The basal forebrain is composed of several structures at the front of your brain that receives information and helps you stay aroused, awake, and alert. The hippocampus is the structure of your brain that's responsible for your ability to maintain your memories. Various ventricles, these fluid-filled cavities that exist in your brain, they contain liquid cerebrospinal fluid, which is found in the brain and spinal cord. These help provide a cushion for the brain and also helps with your nutrition and the hormones that are sort of on reserve in the brain and spinal cord. So think of the ventricles like those little yellow circles we saw on the charts from our previous chapter, chapter 2. The meninges are the membranes that surround the brain and spinal cord. So if you take a look at the picture, it's kind of the outside lining, it's that protective part. Inflammation of the meninges can be painful because it contains your pain receptors. Anytime there's swollen blood vessels in the brain that are causing migraine headaches, it has to do with that area, the meninges. The cerebral cortex is the most prominent part of the brain of mammals. It is the area that contains a cellular layer with the outer surface of the cerebral hemisphere. It is divided into two halves, joined by a number of axons that help connect the two parts of the brain together. It is most developed, the cerebral cortex, in humans, much more than any other species that we know of, that we've studied. Organization of the cerebral cortex, it is organized in 6 distinct layers, and cells of the cortex are divided as well. So here are the main 4 lobes of the brain. There's the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the frontal lobe. And if you take a look at the picture, here is the occipital lobe, which is located in the back of your brain, the temporal lobe on the side, the parietal lobe here kind of on top, and the frontal lobe here at the very front. This is a good chart to show you all of the functions of those areas, but we're going to go into some more details as well, and you'll continue to see the chart. So the occipital lobe is responsible for your visual cortex and visual input. So if it's damaged, it could result in blindness. The parietal lobe is responsible for processing all of your spatial information and numerical information, any information that's kind of sent to your muscles and joints. It's the primary target for any type of touch sensation or muscle strength. The temporal lobe, which is located here on the sides, that's where most of your audition, your ability to hear, takes place. And obviously, if it's damaged, then you could be deaf. The frontal lobe contains both the prefrontal cortex and the precentral gyrus. The precentral gyrus is also known as the primary motor cortex. It's responsible for the control of your motor movement, and the prefrontal cortex is responsible for your sensory information and your thinking ability. Also with planning and higher level thinking, your working memory, those are all parts of the prefrontal cortex. Anytime people have had prefrontal cortex damage, they might give delayed responses. They may take a lot longer to think. A prefrontal lobotomy has to do with the surgical disconnection of the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the body. Brain lobotomies were performed a lot in the 1940s and 50s. They are not performed today. They were primarily performed on people with schizophrenia, and then later with people with other disorders as well. And the reason those things weren't done anymore is because it was, okay, is this something that could be causing harm? Many people who had lobotomies performed had no emotion when they went back to their family. They were not able to focus and make plans, and many of their memories were gone. They just seemed like they weren't themselves anymore because their brain had been severed. So all parts of the cerebral cortex work independently of each other, but they are able to communicate. Remember, there are millions of axons that connect them together. But there is a binding problem. And this is in reference to how the different senses, your visual and auditory cortexes, how they produce a perception of a single object. In order for binding to occur, a person has to be able to perceive sensations happening at the same time in the same place. For example, when we have ventriloquists who use visual stimulus to alter the response of the auditory cortex, binding needs to occur, and maybe there's a theory that the brain binds activities in different areas when they have to produce things at the same time, synchronously. Now to talk about some research methods associated with the brain and functioning. So most of the main research in the study of the brain has looked at brain damage and how to simulate the brain and brain anatomy. Most of the research regarding brain damage has shown us that if a person experiences brain damage, they could have an inability to recognize faces and motion, changes in emotional expression, and many other effects. Phineas Gage was the foreman of a railroad conduction, and he lost part of his frontal lobe and suffered from some brain damage, and that had debilitating effects. I will be putting a video in eCampus for you guys to watch so that you can hear a little bit about Phineas Gage. An ablation is the removal of a brain area, whereas a lesion is when like bruising or damage occurs in a specific brain area, which can be done for research. And then a stereotaxic instrument can be used to study those different areas of the brain. We can also have transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is whenever a magnetic device is applied to a portion of the scalp to deactivate the neurons below the magnet. And this allows research to study behavior with a brain area that's active and then inactive and then active again. And the reason a lot of these techniques are used to study brain damage is because we don't know a lot about the brain until someone's died and they donate their brain for research. So it's important to be able to complete things like transcranial magnetic stimulation so that you can take a look at the different areas. Research has shown us that if a brain area is stimulated, that should increase a person's behavior. Optogenetics tells us that when an area of the brain has a laser shined on it, it creates activity, and you can see the activity that's going on in the neurons. That is how electrodes can determine what's taking place during brain surgery and if a person is continuing to function. An EEG is another way to record brain activity, and that's when electrodes are placed on the brain. If you look at the first picture, things like that, the little devices in a cap that you have to put on so that your brain waves can be measured. And it will show an image like the second picture here to tell you what those brain areas look like. An MEG and a PET scan are also two other ways to measure and record brain activity. So an MEG is similar to an EEG, but it measures faint magnetic fields generated by brain activity. So you can see those faint areas. Whereas if we look back, the EEG is telling us just a little bit more. A PET scan has to do with injecting a radioactive chemical into the person whose brain you need to look at so that you can see a high resolution image such as this one, so that you can measure the blood activity in the brain. A functional MRI is a modified version of an MRI that uses oxygen consumption in the brain to provide a detailed picture. And through a functional MRI, you can see all of these things. It's much safer and less expensive than a PET scan. Phrenology is the process of relating skull activity to behavior. One of the first ways brain activity was measured was through phrenology. There weren't very many results, and the results weren't very accurate, and that's why we had to come up with new ways of doing it. So, in using modern methods, most of the time people use CAT scans or MRI scans to look for abnormal brain structures and functions. And both of those, of course, can be quite costly. A CAT scan, you can see a CAT scanner looks like this. It has to do with injecting the person with a dye into the blood and then taking an X-ray to reveal some activity. It can show you tumors, any abnormalities, and an MRI can apply a magnetic field so that we see an image in the brain. So here they're conducting the MRI, and she's looking at the images from the MRI. Once again, I want to make sure that you guys pay attention to all charts in this area. It's going to talk about some brain damage and then what occurs from those areas of brain damage. So make sure that you are familiar with this. We also have some different, some of the different tests that I just talked to you guys about. Be familiar with those as well. And that's everything that you guys need to know for Chapter 3.